Imagine waking to servants preparing your morning bath. Warm water, scented oils, and a roasted bird for breakfast. Outside, your vineyard stretches to the horizon, where men you legally own weed your fields. That was what it felt like to be rich in the ancient world. But being wealthy in antiquity was not just about luxury, it was a different relationship with existence. Today, wealth is private. In ancient Rome, Greece, and Egypt, wealth was loud, physical, and deeply theatrical. If you were rich, standing still meant instant social death. For a wealthy Roman senator in 100 AD, the day began before sunrise. Power in Rome was transactional and public. Before dawn, hundreds of clients lined up outside your door. This morning ritual was called the Salutatio. It was a daily court where an aristocrat acted like a king while still in his robe. You walked past anxious humans, granting favors and handing out coin baskets. Today, we measure influence by follower counts. In ancient Rome, influence was measured by the physical weight of humans standing in your hallway at 5 in the morning. Meanwhile, your wife underwent her own grueling ritual. Hair in Roman society was complex architecture. A female slave called an ornatrix spent hours using heated iron tongs to construct curls. Pliny complained about the time women wasted on hair, even as he wrote 37 volumes of natural history. So perhaps Pliny simply had strong opinions about how others budgeted their mornings. In ancient Egypt, morning preparations were a spiritual shield. Black coal around the eyes of Egyptian nobles was not vanity. It was believed to ward off infections, desert glare, and evil spirits. Spending 45 minutes before a mirror was a religious act of piety. In ancient Mesopotamia, a rich merchant in Babylon started his day negotiating with a personal god. Every wealthy Babylonian family maintained a private deity advocating for them in divine bureaucracy. If your trading ship sank, your personal god had stepped away from his desk. The fix? More temple offerings. Being rich in Babylon meant keeping a deity on a paid retainer, either ancient networking or history's most expensive subscription service. The mansions of the wealthy were statements carved into stone. A Roman domus was engineered to manipulate emotion. You entered through a narrow fauces, opening into a central atrium. An open skylight poured sunlight onto a pool called the impluvium. Bouncing light hit painted walls, broadcasting power to everyone entering. Beyond lay the tablinum reception hall, and behind that, a peristyle garden surrounded by columns. Deep behind these halls lay dark cells where dozens of slaves slept in silence. That detail tends to get glossed over in travel brochures about Pompeii. In Athens, rich homes were plain outside to avoid mob jealousy, but inside opened into lush private courtyards decorated with fine pottery. In Babylon, elite palaces featured cooling towers and water systems, forcing water uphill into roof gardens. If you have enough slaves in engineering, you can force water uphill in a desert. If you can make water go uphill, you will do it just to prove you can. Inside these mansions, money was transformed into permanent art. Roman walls featured frescoes, with trompe-l'oeil frescoes making small rooms look like endless marble porticos. Egyptian elites painted ceilings to look like the midnight sky with golden stars, while floors depicted swimming fish, making you feel like walking across a river. The wealthy understood that environment shapes psychology. With enough money, you engineer surroundings to remind you that you are exceptional. Food was where ancient wealth became truly absurd. A Roman banquet, known as the cena, was a high-stakes social performance. Important guests reclining on low couches arranged in groups of 3 ate with fingers while leaning on left elbows. Sitting at a table was reserved for servants and peasants. Reclining meant you had arrived. The food was engineered to impress through rarity and complexity. Cookbooks by Appuleius detail recipes for stuffed dormice, flamingo tongues, and milk-fattened snails. Everything was drenched in garum, a fermented fish sauce that traded like liquid gold and went on everything, including other fish sauce. Petronius mocked this in his story of Trimalchio, a wealthy freedman serving a roasted pig stuffed with live birds that flew out when carved. It was a satire, but rooted in real Roman dinners. Wine at these banquets carried a rigid social code. Roman aristocrats aged wines for decades, labeling amphorae by vineyard and vintage. Top vintages like Falernian cost fortunes and were served only to elite guests. Lower-ranked guests were served cheap sour wine diluted with water. One ancient writer recorded a host serving 3 distinct qualities of wine to 3 tiers of guests at the same table.
The guests at the bottom tier noticed. They always notice. In Athens, wealth was showcased during the symposium, a drinking party where aristocrats debated philosophy and played katabos, flicking wine dregs at targets across the room. At the peak of Athenian culture, men funding the Parthenon spent evenings throwing wine dregs. History contains multitudes. Leisure in antiquity was loud, physical, and bloody. Wealthy Romans did not just watch gladiators, they financed them. A private show, called a munus, was the ultimate tool for buying votes. The more gladiators you hired and beasts you imported, the higher your power climbed. Julius Caesar nearly bankrupted himself funding games, inheriting 320 pairs of gladiators in silver armor. Animal hunts required complex logistics, capturing lions in Africa for arena slaughter. Chariot racing drew crowds of 250,000 people to the Circus Maximus. Star charioteers like Gaius Appuleius Diocles earned 35 million sesterces, worth billions today.
If you were rich in antiquity, your body was an ongoing project maintained by an army of helpers. Wealthy Romans built private baths with heated floors and cold pools. After exercise, slaves rubbed your skin with oil and scraped sweat using a metal strigil. Scraped grime from famous gladiators was bottled and sold in small flasks as luxury celebrity merchandise. Women applied face masks made from barley flour and crocodile dung, which Galen recommended for skin whitening. Cleopatra traveled with a herd of donkeys for daily milk baths. Rich Romans walked through streets with slow, deliberate steps. Rushing was for working people who had somewhere to be. Walking slowly proved the world waited for you. Even the Roman toga, a 6-meter semicircle of heavy wool, required multiple slaves to fold and drape around your body. The garment was impossible to put on alone, making it wearable proof of domestic staff. Yet behind all this gold lay constant anxiety. Wealth in the ancient world was fragile. There were no limited liability corporations, no insurance, and no bankruptcy courts. If your merchant ship sank, your wealth vanished. If an emperor grew suspicious, your property was confiscated and family exiled. Seneca noted the wealthy were often the most terrified people because they had the most to lose. Aristocrats lived in dread of losing rank, because losing money meant losing your Senate seat, your clients, and your public reputation, known as fama. In Egypt, elites coped by spending adult lives building elaborate tombs and paying priests to maintain mortuary cults. Ramesses II expanded his tomb for 67 years until his death at 90. None of this luxury was possible without a dark foundation. Every bath drawn, every meal cooked, every vineyard weeded, and every stone carved was performed by enslaved human beings. Pliny mentions a Roman who left 4,116 slaves in his will. Elites viewed slaves as property with personalities. Ironically, many educated people in Rome were enslaved Greeks who worked as tutors, physicians, architects, and accountants. Epictetus began life as a slave. The men who taught Roman aristocrats philosophy were men who could be bought and sold at market. Ultimately, the most valuable thing ancient wealth bought was control over time. The Greeks called this concept skhole, the root of our word school. It meant spending days reading, debating philosophy, and making art without laboring for survival. There was no modern hustle culture or productivity optimization, simply the luxury of existing on your own schedule. Being rich in antiquity was beautiful, violent, fragrant, terrifying, and deeply dependent on human suffering. It was a complete performance that makes modern wealth look understated. But stripped of marble and gold, ancient wealth reveals a timeless truth. Humans have always spent fortunes trying to prove that their brief time on Earth truly mattered.